Hey, spicy lovers, we're here, we're neurospicy, and sometimes that shit is hard, okay? Listen, I'm Carlen, and this is the Spicy Fat Podcast. How you feeling today? When I ask that, most people will answer with good, fine, okay. To my spicy brain, though, those words feel like really boring adjectives from mundane or disconnected living. It feels fake, doesn't it? Maybe though this is how most of us put on a mask so as not to draw too much attention to ourselves. Maybe this is how we decide to not connect too much with anyone. Or really, is this how we are choosing and speaking to not connect deeper within ourselves? We say fine like we're brushing our teeth, just like a regular thing that, we respond all the time. It's an automatic behavior or response. In therapy with me, answering fine in a session is where I lean in and I ask you to explore what that means to you. Okay, I know that might be a little bit annoying. I'm sure it sounds a little bit annoying, but it's therapy and it's my job to support you in addressing your shit, especially in the crevices where fine hangs out. Fine is how we hide and how we dismiss who we are and what we are. Fine can also be an emotional boundary, and I totally accept that. But who are you trying to keep away? Is it me from you, or is it you from yourself? I hid from myself for a while. After having my weight loss surgery reversed in the summer of 2021, I felt like I was reborn to learning how my body worked without being controlled from the inside out. In so many ways, prior to this snapshot of time in my life, I was thriving. I was thriving before that surgery. I was working out 4 times a week at like a CrossFit-esque functional fitness gym. I was moving my body. I was laughing. I was thriving in business, and I had many, many friends. But what I didn't know was that I was about to be bitch slapped by a huge part of me that was waiting for its time to shine and reveal that it had been hidden my entire life. A big part of me was hiding, and all the while I thought I was doing just fine until I wasn't. It wasn't until life got quiet and all I was left with was my lonely heart and a busy as fuck brain that the true journey of understanding my neurospiciness came to fruition. Here's the context, okay? Picture me. Completely isolated in a brand new city, trying to appreciate the manifestation of a dream I had been waiting a lifetime for, then coming to realize I wasn't fine at all. I was 38 and my existence felt like a fucking tornado. My relationships were crumbling and no longer making sense. I didn't recognize my friends and they didn't recognize me. Everything felt separate from me and of me. Then it all started falling apart. Rather, I started falling apart. And somewhere in between laying on my couch, because I again didn't have plans, in this like beautiful industrial loft on the east side of Toronto, but hating living in a box, hating living at some really unfortunate points of that time. And getting deeply immersed in TikTok and Instagram, social media, desperate for connection, but not willing to accommodate it with Tinder because honestly, I was still growing through the experience of a sexual assault just a year prior. So having sex with randoms for connection just wasn't it for me. I couldn't do it. That's when I started to relate to content that I hadn't really given much thought towards as a person, nor as a psychotherapist. I watched dozens of reels and TikToks of women talking about their experience with ADHD, ADHD, and other neurodivergences, and then realize, oh, wait a second, I think this is me. And just as any ADHDer can attest to, once the dopamine strikes with new subject matter, we go all the way in, okay? So here I am, going all the way in. I'm trying to process, what does this mean? What do I relate to? And then this friend said to me, well, everybody has ADHD these days, as she rolled her eyes when I told her about my personal curiosity. Was she right? I thought, I had to sit with it. I had to sit with, was she right? I sometimes still sit with it and feeling like maybe in some ways she's not wrong, because the world wasn't built for diversity in too many ways. So I can appreciate that we can all feel different in this world at different times in our life. But also I know now that accepting someone saying to you, well, we're all a little bit ADHD, is also dismissive and can be emotionally abusive to the experience of neurodivergent people who truly have to live with their beautiful brains daily. I don't think, especially, since the pandemic in the last few years, that there isn't a person who hasn't heard the statement, everybody seems to have ADHD these days. But are they right? Well, according to recent data from insurance companies from 2021 to 2022, the number of unique claimants for ADHD medication ages 18 and over grew by 24.5%. So it seems like a lot more people are coming to recognize their neurodivergence, and especially ADHD. 24% growth in claimant activity is substantial. But let me backtrack a minute, okay? Let me backtrack a minute for all of the muggles tuning in that I love before I give you my thoughts on why the perception that everybody has ADHD now exists. All right, I'm going to teach you some stuff first. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about neurodivergence and neurotypicality. And that's why I called some of you muggles, because, if you watch Harry Potter, if you're into the magic world, I equate neurotypical as a muggle and neurodivergent as a magic. It's just a fun thing that I play with in my own mind and sometimes with my clients in order to allow us to have some radical self-compassion for our experiences. Because ADHD is a form of neurodivergence. But to be honest, I'm not actually entirely sure what that even means. Blame it on my naivete, and the fact that I'm not a neurologist, all right? But what even is a normal brain? Who hasn't been inflicted by trauma, indoctrination, or humanist decline? All three of these factors contribute at various points in the life cycle to exacerbate or contribute to a divergence of the mind, especially after a shared trauma like a global pandemic, because it was a shared trauma and it did affect your mind. The word neurodivergent means a different brain. If you break it down, neuro relates to the brain and how it works, and divergent means moving or extending in different directions from a common point. So neurodiversity is a framework for understanding human brain function and the spectrum of mental challenges. It's a classification system that seeks to capture a spectrum of brain function, okay? So neurotypical means a person whose neurotype is typical of the majority of society. That typically implies that there's a bunch of people in the world whose brains mostly work one common way. Neurodivergent is a person whose neurotype is divergent of the majority of society. We are the subset of people whose brains work in a different way. I call us the neurospicy party, okay? Because it's functioning with flavor. Like, that's how I have come to embrace ADHD. And today's episode for me is about sharing my story as a neurodivergent woman with ADHD. However, I also wanted to use this time to inform everyone about what neurodiversity means. Because there are many neurodivergent conditions, a word as some people would say. I actually prefer the term neurominority or neurominorities, because that's always been the most beautiful thing about humanity for me, right? That we are all different flavors of ice cream in our earthly shop of life, okay? And how our brains work is not separate of that. I think it's the world that we've bought into that's too rigid, not the humans themselves. Human brains are neuroplastic, okay? Neuroplasticity, the concept of neuroplastic means and refers to the lifelong capacity of the brain to change and rewire itself in response to the stimulation of learning and experience. So examples of situations where your brain demonstrates neuroplasticity includes things like learning a new language or practicing music or memorizing how to navigate around your city or a new city, for example. It can also occur if you lose like a major sense, so such as hearing or sight, right? Our bodies adjust. They become neuroplastic to the new experience that we have learned. We as humans are an endless masterpiece of constant evolution, even in our own life cycles. Your brain is never once the same. Okay, think about that. Your brain is never once the same. So if we are constantly changing and adapting, why wouldn't we want our world to reflect that? That's where neurodiversity awareness and advocacy kicks in. Because what we once thought of as ADD, that only impacted young boys, being something that they would probably eventually grow out of, has become the reason why an almost 40-year-old female, me, almost unalived herself during a time where what was supposed to be the happiest manifestation of my independence and success. There have been gaps of service and knowledge exchanges, big ones. So that's why I'm doing this today. Some of the neurominorities that exist within the neurodiversity spectrum include presentations such as ADHD and autism, or ADHD, which is autism and ADHD at the same time. But also presentations such as OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression, dyslexia. Sorry, that is a hard word to say. Dyslexia, which is a challenge with letters and being able to read them in the correct way. Dyscalculia, which is a challenge with numbers, which I have very much seen in myself, in my work, and my ability to do business. Dyspraxia, which is a divergence with movement, a challenge with movement. But also included are bipolar disorder, Tourette's and tics, epilepsy, schizophrenia, panic disorders or conditions, sensory conditions, but also rage or personality disorders such as, and I'm going to say this, and I know that this is controversial and somebody listening to this is going to go, but I also believe that as a personality disorder, as a spectrum of neurodiversity, narcissism belongs on that spectrum. I believe narcissism is a neurodivergence and not just an asshole disorder, okay? As it is very much an emotional dysregulation due to a neurological difference. Honestly, send me a message if you want me to get into narcissism on this podcast, because when it relates to the lens of divergence, there is actually a lot there to discuss. So let me know, all right? But in Canada, just to kind of bring it back to the prevalence of neurodivergence in our country, in Canada, the data shared for September 2023, according to CADRA, the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance, shares that ADHD is one of the most common neurodiversities in Canada, affecting 4 to 6% of adults and 5 to 7% of children, which is approximately 1.8 million Canadians. Worldwide, it is actually estimated that 366 million adults worldwide, which is approximately 5% of the global population, have persistent ADHD from childhood, which includes individuals who experience childhood onset paired with a continued ADHD symptom in adulthood. That equates to about 5% of children worldwide and 2.5% of adults currently, which again, statistically is interesting because ADHD isn't something you grow out of. It is part of who you are. So those kids with ADHD become adults with ADHD, regardless of their symptom management profiles. All right. So comparably, approximately 3.5% of people in the world are doctors. Okay. So let's just compare so that you can grasp how much, 5% of the global population is. Okay. 3.5% of people in the world are doctors. So if you know a doctor, then look around you and identify who has ADHD because they are almost as common as one another. In fact, I know that you know people who have ADHD. I know that you know people who have ADHD because many of us diagnose, hide in plain sight, and you enjoy the fruits of our busy brains extensively, okay? So I kind of want to move into a little bit of a fun part of this because I know you know people. I know people who have ADHD, but I want you to know and recognize who some of those people are and how wonderfully they function in this world. So I made a little list, all right? I made a little list of some famous people who have ADHD. And let's talk about it. The list might surprise you, but according to the internet, and from a blog post that it's actually a platform that I am deeply obsessed with. It's called Attitude Magazine, attitudemag.com, ADDITUDE mag.com. Big shout out to them. I love this resource. I love their platform. They have webinars and support information for adults, children, parents who need to understand their ADHD. But they did this wonderful blog post. And here's some of the famous people who have been confirmed and talked about in public that they have ADHD. All right. So let's start with Simone Biles, Miss Simone Biles, the Olympian. Yeah, ADHD. Greta Gerwig. Have you heard of the movie Barbie? Yeah, because Greta Gerwig is the best fucking director and screenwriter for the movie Barbie, along with many others. Do you like Harry Potter though? And I'm not talking about your relationship with J.K. Rowling. I'm talking about the storyline and some of the actors because Emma Watson, aka Hermione Granger, yeah, ADHD. Solange Knowles, the Grammy Award-winning singer, ADHD. Mel Robbins, who is probably a podcast that you love listening to. I love listening to Mel Robbins. And she very openly discusses and talks about how she has ADHD and how she manages that in her life, especially as a parent. I would love to meet her one day and jam out in an ADHD podcast. We're manifesting it, friends. We're manifesting it. Okay. Other amazing people are Lisa Ling, who is an acclaimed journalist. Audra McDonald, 6 times Tony Award-winning singer-actress. Paris Hilton, all right, the queen herself. Mel B, Scary Spice. Of course she has ADHD, right? Of course. And like, I know I just gave you a list of a whole bunch of women, but like, I'm going to give you like a little special mention to the guys. All right. Little special mention to the guys. So wonderful men like Trevor Noah, Mark Ruffalo, Justin Timberlake. Yeah. Channing Tatum, Dave Grohl, Will.i.am, Bill Gates, whether you love him or hate him, Elon Musk, that explains a lot, don't you think? You know what I mean? Defiance and narcissistic tendencies, hello, okay? Sir Richard Branson, Jim Carrey, Johnny Depp, Ryan Gosling? Yeah, and this might also explain a lot for you too, those of you who have followed this career, Michael Jordan, all right? All of these wonderful people have ADHD, and there's no surprise here that this is a pretty creative list because there are various sides to ADHD, and because it is a deep darkness, but also a delightful tool. The moral of the story is that someone you know probably has ADHD, and if you don't, you most likely will as diagnosis criteria and awareness continues to grow. The rule of thumb for us spicy brains is that in a group of friends, there's always a patient zero, okay? Meaning one person learns that they have ADHD, then the rest of their friend group most likely will start to take a look at themselves to determine if they do as well. And it's because like kind of attracts like when it comes to neurospiciness. That also happened in my family, for example. I learned about my divergence, which set off a familial investigation that determined that many of my family members have it too. I honestly just thought I was born of like dismissive assholes. I'm not going to lie to you, but like now I have a new lens. So yay to emotional healing, you know, because it brought me into this space of really asking, is ADHD genetic? Well, researchers suspect that ADHD may happen because of a gene involved in the creation of dopamine, a chemical that controls the brain's ability to maintain regular and consistent attention. But conclusive studies are far outnumbered by ADHD myths and misperceptions today. ADHD is not caused by bad parenting or too much sugar or too many video games, although those things can exacerbate ADHD symptoms and mimetic responses from PTSD, trauma, and anxiety. ADHD is a brain-based biological difference, and brain imaging studies and other research show many differences in the brains of individuals with ADHD. Our brains, even in the subset of ADHD, also have many differences. Other studies reveal that a child with ADHD is 4 times as likely to have had a relative also diagnosed or undiagnosed with the condition. That's just that, you know, creepy uncle who lives in grandma's basement still, okay? Because available evidence suggests that ADHD is genetic, passed down from parent to child. And ADHD does seem to run in at least some families. So if you have it, okay, take a breath. If you have ADHD, you most likely got it from one of your parents. Have fun, okay? Have fun figuring that out and like what that means now to how you like relate to your parents, okay? Because why does ADHD or why does everyone have ADHD these days? Well, it is my belief that we are seeing a sharp rise in cases because the spotlight is finally on women like me, 35 to 50 years of age, who have been underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed their whole lives. When someone comes into my office and says, my doctor told me I have depression and anxiety, my first suspicion is always, but do they actually just have ADHD? Women like me women like me have had enough of falling through the cracks. Okay. See, there's that word stuff that happens when you have ADHD. We've had enough of trying to fit into a social media world of likes and comments. And quite honestly, we're fucking tired. Like, I'm like tired, like proper tired. Like, my heart, my body, my mind are tired. I'm tired of constantly having to advocate and inform healthcare practitioners and support services why I need what I need. I'm tired of being dismissed in my experience. Instead, I'm told I have anxiety and a binge eating disorder. I can't wait to tell you that story when my doctor told me, you have a binge eating disorder. Okay, sir. Okay. And I'm told that what I need costs extra. I'm told that I have a disability that no one is willing to accommodate. So here are some quick ADHD facts that I think summarize our chat today. All right, just some food for thought for you to take with you. ADHD is not simply something you grow out of. The fact that this condition can, and clearly does, continue into adulthood is something that all family members and employers and healthcare practitioners should know. When left untreated, ADHD can present alongside other mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety. One of the primary factors driving the spike, and what I believe one of the primary factors driving the spike in an increase of diagnosis, is the overall awareness about ADHD. As doctors become better equipped to recognize the signs and symptoms of ADHD in adulthood, they can better differentiate it from other conditions, right? ADHD was once a young boy's challenge. Millennial boys from like the late 80s and throughout the 90s who had a bunch of symptoms like hyperactivity, fidgeting, and impulse control were thrown on Adderall and Ritalin. Then they and everyone else were told that, eventually they'll just grow out of it, right? The funny thing is that no one even thought about the girls. 50% of the population has been suffering, accommodating, and masking who they are and what they need. But no one, even ourselves, caught on, because we are all, but like especially women, are conditioned to exist in discomfort. ADHD isn't a disability, but rather a different ability. It is a neural minority and a diverse way of thinking. My brain and my emotions are not less than or invalid in comparison to yours. In fact, there is no comparison needed. It's more, I'm different from you, and you are different from me. And why does this world only attribute validity and build upon who you are and seeks to diagnose or fear who I am? You can find more, okay? You can find more information regarding ADHD and the stuff I'm talking about today in the show notes. So just a heads up if you are curious about some of the stuff that I shared today. I have a few links to resources that might be helpful. But on the next episode, I'm going to share the emotional tornado that my late diagnosis propelled me into. We're gonna get back into some storytelling, okay? I'm going to tell you the story of me in that East End Toronto loft, wishing that it all felt right when it absolutely did not. Not knowing I had ADHD ruined too many relationships, my work, my body, how I eat, how I want to eat, how I desire, how I have sex, and how I want to desire and have sex, and my trajectory of success in life. I can't help, though, but sit here in pride for how I'm showing up on this podcast. I'm not gonna lie, because this is a lot of work, man, But I'm also really proud for the work that I have done and am doing to reclaim my life. Because I also sit with slight sadness that I had to blow up so many parts of my life in order to uncover my truth. But as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for allowing yourself to deserve more. Stay spicy, lovers, and I'll chat with you soon.